When Shaquille O'Neal heard that a young nursing student was about to lose her job for helping a sick elderly woman who was only 4 days late on a return, he had no idea that simply turning around instead of walking away would save a dream, hold a struggling family together, and one day inspire that same young woman to become the nurse who stopped for someone else. Shaquille O'Neal had walked into the Walmart expecting to stay less than 10 minutes. He had somewhere else to be later that day, and all he needed was a replacement charger before getting back on the road. There was no appearance scheduled, no camera crew waiting outside, and no employee standing near the entrance expecting him. That was exactly how Shaq liked it sometimes. He could walk through a regular store, see regular families buying groceries, hear kids arguing over cereal, and remember that most people were simply trying to get through another day. A few customers recognized him as soon as he entered, but he smiled, nodded, and kept moving. He found the electronics section, picked up a charger, and was reading the back of the package when a man's voice carried across several aisles. Shaq stopped reading before he even understood the words. There was something about the tone that made him look up. The voice was not screaming, but it was loud enough that people nearby had started paying attention. It had the sharp edge of someone who wanted an audience. Shaq had heard that kind of voice before, in locker rooms, offices, restaurants, and business meetings. It was the voice of someone who believed being in charge gave him permission to make another person feel small. Shaq set the charger down and looked toward the front of the store. From where he stood, he could see part of the customer service area. A young woman in a Walmart vest stood behind the counter with both hands pressed flat against it. A manager stood on the other side holding a clipboard. Two employees nearby had stopped working, but neither one looked directly at them. The young woman did not argue. She simply stood there, trying very hard not to let her face show what the rest of her body already had. Her name was Destiny. She was 23 years old, and that morning she had done something she believed was right. An older woman had come to the service desk carrying a vacuum cleaner that had stopped working almost immediately after she bought it. Her return date had expired 4 days earlier. Under normal circumstances, Destiny would have explained the policy and called a supervisor if the customer wanted to appeal it. But the woman had looked exhausted, and when Destiny asked why she had waited, the answer came quietly. She had spent the previous week in the hospital with pneumonia. She had brought discharge papers because she was afraid no one would believe her. Destiny looked at the papers, then at the woman's shaking hands, and made a decision. She processed the exchange. The woman thanked her twice before leaving. Destiny thought that would be the end of it. Instead, less than 10 minutes later, her manager walked over with the clipboard. He had apparently seen the entire transaction. "You knew that return was outside the window," he said. Destiny nodded. There was no point pretending otherwise. "She was in the hospital," Destiny answered. "It was 4 days." The manager's expression did not change. "You were hired to follow store policy, not decide which customers deserve exceptions." Destiny glanced toward the aisle where the older woman had disappeared. "I understand the rule. I just didn't think being sick should cost her the money she spent on something that was already broken." The manager leaned closer to the counter. By then, several customers were close enough to hear every word. "That isn't your call," he said. "If every employee starts deciding when the rules matter, we don't have rules anymore." Destiny felt her stomach tighten. She had heard warnings before. She had been corrected before. But there was something different in his voice now. He wanted this conversation public. He wanted other employees to hear what happened when someone crossed him. He turned one page on the clipboard and said, "Go get your things. I'm recommending termination." For a second, Destiny was sure she had misunderstood him. "You're firing me over this?" she asked. The manager answered without hesitation. "I'm holding you responsible for your decision." What he could not see was everything hiding behind Destiny's silence. He did not know about the nursing classes she attended between shifts. He did not know that her mother worked long hours and came home some nights too tired to eat. He did not know about her grandmother's medical bills or the small notebook Destiny kept inside her bag where she wrote down every dollar she managed to save. He did not know that the number written on the most recent page was $623. That money was supposed to help keep her in nursing school. Losing the job did not mean losing spending money. It meant that within weeks, the future she had been building could disappear. Destiny wanted to tell him all of that. but she knew it would not change anything. So she kept her hands on the counter. They were beginning to shake, and pressing them against the hard surface was the only way to hide it. She thought about asking him to speak somewhere private. She thought about begging for one more chance. She even thought about apologizing for helping the woman, even though the idea made something inside her hurt. Instead, she lifted her chin and said, "I understand what I did." The manager gave a short nod, as if that settled everything. Then he added, "Good. Then you understand why there are consequences." Destiny swallowed and looked down for only a second. She had promised herself she would not cry in front of him. Across the store, Shaq had heard enough. The man traveling with him noticed the change in his face. "You ready?" he asked, assuming Shaq had finished shopping. Shaq did not answer right away. His eyes were still on the young woman behind the service counter. He could see the manager talking. He could see the employees pretending not to watch. Most of all, he could see Destiny standing perfectly still while something important was being taken away from her in front of strangers. Shaq looked down at the charger he had placed back on the shelf. For one simple second, he had a choice. He could pick it up, pay for it, and leave. Nobody would blame him. This was not his employee, not his store, not his problem. Then Destiny looked up. She did not know Shaq was there. She was not looking for anyone to save her. Her eyes simply moved past the manager for a moment toward the open aisle behind him. Shaq saw fear there, but he saw something else too. She was scared of what would happen next, yet she still had not apologized for helping that woman. That was the part that stayed with him. Shaq had spent most of his life being the biggest man in almost every room he entered, but his mother had taught him long ago that size meant very little if you only used it for yourself. Sometimes strength was not about what you could lift or how loudly you could speak. Sometimes it was simply deciding not to walk away. Shaq stepped out of the electronics aisle. The person beside him followed his eyes toward the service counter and understood. "You want to go over there?" Shaq started walking. "Yeah," he said. "I do." He did not hurry. He did not need to. With every step, another customer noticed him. A teenage employee near self-checkout stopped moving. A father whispered something to his son. One worker stared for a second before quickly looking away. But Shaq was not paying attention to any of them. His eyes stayed on the manager and the young woman behind the counter. The manager was still speaking when the noise around him began to disappear. Destiny noticed the silence first. Her eyes moved past her manager's shoulder. Then they widened. The manager stopped in the middle of his sentence. He turned around, and for the first time that morning, the man who had made Destiny feel very small had to look up, then higher. Shaquille O'Neal was standing at the end of the aisle, and he had heard almost everything. For a few seconds, Shaquille O'Neal said nothing. He stood at the end of the aisle, watching the manager speak to Destiny as if no one else in the store mattered. Then, the silence began to spread. A customer near the service desk recognized Shaq first, then a cashier, then a teenage employee by self-checkout. One by one, people stopped moving. The manager kept talking, too focused on Destiny to notice the strange quiet behind him. Destiny noticed it first. Her eyes shifted past his shoulder, and the fear on her face changed into surprise. The manager followed her gaze and turned around. He looked up, then higher, until he realized who was standing there. His voice changed almost immediately. The sharp tone he had used with Destiny softened into something careful. Shaq stepped closer and asked, "Can someone tell me what's going on?" The manager straightened his vest and said, "It's an internal employee matter, sir." Shaq did not react to the sudden politeness. He looked at Destiny instead. "How late was the return?" he asked. "4 days," she said. Shaq asked why. Destiny swallowed before answering. The customer had been in the hospital with pneumonia. Shaq turned back to the manager. He did not raise his voice, but the whole area was quiet enough that everyone could hear him. "So she gave a sick woman 4 extra days, and now you want to fire her for it?" The manager said the issue was bigger than one return. If every employee ignored policy whenever they felt sympathy for someone, the rules would mean nothing. Shaq nodded slowly. "I understand why businesses have rules. I've been in business a long time." For a moment, the manager seemed relieved. Then Shaq continued. "Rules protect a business. Judgment protects people. A good manager should know when you need both. The relief disappeared from the manager's face. Destiny looked down at her hands. She had not been trying to challenge the store. She had simply looked at an older woman fresh out of the hospital and made one decision she could live with. With respect, sir, you don't know the full situation, the manager said. Shock gave a small nod. Then explain it. The manager claimed Destiny had been warned before about using too much discretion with customers. Destiny looked up. I was never warned about returns, she said quietly. The manager turned toward her with a look that told her to stop. Shaq saw it. Let her finish, he said. Destiny took a breath. She explained that a supervisor had once reminded her to ask for help when a situation was unclear, but she had never been written up for returns. Today didn't feel unclear, she said. She had hospital papers. The vacuum was broken. I thought helping her was the right thing to do. Nobody spoke for a moment. Shaq looked at the manager and asked, if that woman had been your mother, what would you have wanted the person behind this counter to do? The manager opened his mouth, but no answer came. That pause changed the room. A few minutes earlier, Destiny had been forced to defend herself while everyone watched. Now the manager was the one searching for words. Finally, he said, I still have to enforce policy. Shaq nodded once. Then enforce it, but don't use it to humiliate somebody. He glanced at Destiny. You can correct an employee without trying to make her feel small in front of a store full of people? Destiny's eyes filled and she blinked fast, refusing to let the tears fall. The manager looked around and seemed to realize how many people were watching. Sir, I need to handle this through our process, he said. Shaq reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Good, he answered. Then let's make sure the right people are part of that process. The manager's face tightened. Destiny stared at the phone in Shaq's hand, unsure whether to feel hopeful or afraid. Shaq looked at her once, then back at the manager. He was about to make a call. Shaq kept the phone in his hand, but he did not make the call yet. He wanted the manager to understand why this moment mattered before anyone higher up stepped in. Let me ask you something, he said. What if that woman had been your mother? The manager looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Shaq continued. If she had just gotten out of the hospital, would 4 days still matter more than everything else? The question landed harder than any accusation could have. For the first time since Shaq walked over, the manager had no quick answer. After a few seconds, the manager tried to recover. You can't run a business based on emotion, he said. Shaq nodded, because in one sense, the man was right. He had spent years in business and knew rules mattered. But rules were supposed to create order, not give someone permission to stop thinking. No, Shaq said. But you can't manage people like they're numbers on a spreadsheet either. Destiny stood behind the counter listening, still unsure whether this conversation would save her job or make everything worse. For a moment, Shaq thought about his mother, Lucille O'Neill. He did not need a long memory or some dramatic speech from the past. He could almost hear the way she would question him when she believed he'd forgotten something important. She had always cared less about how powerful he looked and more about what he did with that power. If you had more than the person standing in front of you, more money, more influence, more authority, then you had an even greater responsibility not to make that person feel worthless. Shaq looked at Destiny and saw a young woman trying to hold herself together after being embarrassed in front of strangers. Then he looked at the manager and knew exactly what his mother would have asked him. Did you leave that person feeling stronger, or did you use your position to make them feel small? The manager broke the silence. I'm responsible for this department, he said. If employees ignore policy, I have to deal with it. Shaq did not argue with that. Then deal with it, he replied. Coach her. Write down what happened. Explain what she should do next time. But firing her in front of everybody because she gave a sick woman 4 extra days, that's not just enforcing a rule. He paused and looked around the service area. You turned it into a lesson for everyone watching. That sentence hit Destiny harder than she expected. Until then, she had been trying to convince herself that maybe she was overreacting, that maybe this was simply how workplaces operated. But hearing someone else describe what had happened made her realize why the moment had felt so humiliating. She had made one decision, and instead of correcting her privately, the manager had turned her fear into a warning for other employees. Destiny slowly took her hands off the counter. They were still shaking, but she no longer tried to hide them. Shaq noticed, but he did not draw attention to it. He looked back at the manager. "I don't know your company's full process, and I'm not pretending I do," he said. "But I know what I stood here and watched." The manager glanced at the phone in Shaq's hand. Shaq continued, "If this young woman is about to lose her job because she showed some mercy to a customer who had been sick, somebody above this level should at least hear the whole story before that decision gets made." The manager's expression changed. A few minutes earlier, he'd been completely focused on Destiny and the power he had over her future. Now his eyes stayed on Shaq's phone. Destiny felt her stomach tighten again. She knew that one call from Shaquille O'Neal could turn this into something far bigger than she had ever wanted. Part of her wanted to ask him to stop before things became worse. Another part remembered the woman with the hospital papers and knew she still did not regret helping her. Shaq unlocked his phone and searched for a number. Then he looked at Destiny once, not like a celebrity looking at a stranger, but like someone making sure she understood one simple thing. Whatever happened next, she would finally get a chance to be heard. Shaq pressed the call button. The call connected and the service counter seemed to get even quieter. Shaq did not raise his voice or ask anyone to be fired. He simply explained what he had seen from the moment the older woman left the counter to the moment Destiny was told to gather her things. He said the return had been only 4 days late, that the customer had just come out of the hospital, and that Destiny had made a judgment call because she believed the woman deserved some grace. Then he explained how the manager had handled it in front of customers and employees. "I'm not calling to tell you how to run your company," Shaq said. "I'm calling because a young woman is about to lose her job, and I think the people making that decision should know exactly how it happened." He gave the store location, the time, and the names he knew, then listened without interrupting. The manager stood several feet away, no longer holding the clipboard with the same confidence. A few minutes earlier, he had spoken like the outcome was already decided. Now he watched Shaq's face, trying to guess what the person on the other end was saying. Destiny did not know whether the call was helping or making things worse. Her heart was beating so hard that she barely heard the carts rolling somewhere behind her. She kept thinking about her nursing classes, the bills waiting at home, and the $623 she had saved one small amount at a time. If this turned into a bigger problem, she could still lose everything. But for the first time that morning, the story being told was not only the manager's version. Shaq listened for another minute, then said, "That's all I'm asking. Please look into it before anyone makes a final decision." He thanked the person and ended the call. No threats, no famous name pressure, no demand for punishment. He put the phone back in his pocket and looked at the manager. "Someone will follow up," he said. The manager gave a stiff nod and looked down at the clipboard. He suddenly seemed very interested in the papers he had been holding all morning. Then Shaq turned toward Destiny. His expression changed immediately. The businesslike tone was gone. "I need you to understand something," he said. Destiny looked at him, hoping he was about to tell her everything was fixed. Instead, he said, "I can't promise you this job will still be yours tomorrow." Her face fell before she could hide it. That one sentence brought all the fear rushing back. Shaq saw it and continued before she could speak. "But I can promise you this. Today, you are not standing here alone." Destiny had held herself together through the warning, the embarrassment, and the threat of losing her job. She had kept her hands pressed to the counter so no one would see them shake. She had even managed to speak without crying when the manager told her to collect her things. But those words broke through the wall she had been holding up all morning. Her eyes filled, and she turned her face slightly, embarrassed by the tears. Shaq did not tell her not to cry. He did not touch her shoulder or make the moment bigger than it needed to be. He simply stayed there. After a few seconds, Destiny whispered, "Thank you." Shaq shook his head once. "You don't owe me anything." Then he added, "Just remember why you made the choice you made today." Destiny looked toward the entrance where the older woman had left earlier. She knew exactly why. "Because she needed someone to help her," she said. Shaq nodded. Then don't let this morning convince you that caring about people was the mistake. The store manager arrived a short time later after receiving a call from higher up. He spoke to Destiny privately and told her no final employment decision would be made that day. She would be paid for the rest of her shift and could go home while the situation was reviewed. Destiny nodded, thanked him, and went to the break room to collect her bag. She expected to feel relieved, but instead she felt empty and tired. The fear had not disappeared. It had simply loosened its grip enough for her to breathe. When Destiny came back out, Shaq was already walking toward the exit. She watched the sliding doors open and close behind him and assumed that was the last time she would ever see him. As far as she knew, he had done what he could and moved on with his day. She put her bag over her shoulder and headed toward the employee exit, thinking about the bus ride home and how she would explain everything to her mother. She had no idea that Shaq had not left yet. He was waiting outside. Destiny left the store with her backpack pulled tight against her chest and headed toward the bus stop at the edge of the parking lot. The manager had told her she could go home with pay while the company reviewed what happened, but that did not feel like good news yet. She still did not know whether she would have a job tomorrow. She sat on the metal bench and stared at the pavement, trying to slow her breathing before the bus came. She had held herself together inside the store, but now that no one was watching, the weight of the morning finally caught up with her. A few tears slipped down her face and she wiped them away quickly with the sleeve of her shirt. She did not notice the black SUV still parked several rows away. Shaq did. He had been about to leave when he saw her sitting alone. For a moment, he considered letting her have the privacy, but something about the way she held that backpack made him stop. It looked less like a bag and more like the only thing keeping her together. Shaq walked over slowly and stopped a few feet away. "You okay?" he asked. Destiny looked up and gave the answer people give when they do not want to become someone else's problem. "I'm fine." Shaq watched her for a second, then gave a small half-smile. "I've said that thousands of times when I wasn't fine." That surprised a short laugh out of her, and then the laugh broke into tears she could not hide anymore. Shaq sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving enough space so she would not feel crowded. He did not ask her to explain everything, but once Destiny started talking, the truth came out fast. She told him she was in nursing school and worked at Walmart because her family could not carry the cost alone. Her mother worked long hours, her grandmother had health problems, and there was always another bill waiting before the last one was fully paid. Destiny reached into her backpack and pulled out a small spiral notebook with bent corners. Inside were dates, shift totals, grocery amounts, bus fare, and little savings deposits written in careful handwriting. She turned to the latest page and pointed to one number, $623. "That's what I have," she said. "If I lose this job, I don't know how I stay in school." Shaq looked at the notebook longer than Destiny expected. He had seen people ask him for money before, sometimes directly and sometimes without saying the words. But Destiny was not asking. She seemed almost embarrassed that he now knew the number at all. Shaq finally asked, "How much do you still owe?" She told him, then quickly added that she was not telling him because she expected him to pay it. Shaq believed her. He looked across the parking lot for a moment, then asked a question that confused her. "If I paid everything you owe today, what would change?" Destiny answered without thinking. "I could stay in school." Shaq nodded. "And after that?" Destiny opened her mouth, but no answer came. She thought about next semester, another tuition bill, her grandmother's medicine, the rent, the bus, and the hours she would still need to work. One paid balance would give her time, but it would not change the life waiting for her on the other side of that payment. Shaq could see that she understood what he meant. "That's why I don't want to just hand you money," he said. Destiny looked down at the notebook, and for a second she felt disappointed in herself for hoping there might be an easy answer. Shaq noticed the change in her face and leaned forward. "I'm not saying I won't help you," he said. "I'm saying I don't want my help to disappear the next time a bill shows up." The bus was still several minutes away. Cars moved through the parking lot around them, and people pushed carts toward the entrance as if nothing unusual had happened that morning. Shaq asked what kind of nurse Destiny wanted to become. She told him she was not sure yet, only that she wanted to work somewhere people were not treated like problems just because they were scared, sick, or short on money. That answer made him look at her differently. The young woman who had risked her job for an older customer was not acting out of impulse. She was already becoming the kind of person she hoped to be. Shaq looked again at the number in the notebook, then back at Destiny. "I want to help you find a road," he said. "Not just survive another month." Destiny stared at him, unsure what he meant. Then Shaq reached into his jacket pocket and she realized the conversation was not over. Shaq got back into the SUV, closed the door, and sat there without saying where to go. Through the window, he could still see Destiny at the bus stop with the small notebook resting in her lap. A few minutes earlier, he had told her he wanted to help her find a road, not just get through another month. Now he had to figure out what that actually meant. He could pay the rest of her tuition before the bus arrived. He could make one call and probably solve the problem that had scared her all morning. But something about that felt too easy, and Shaq had learned that easy help was not always lasting help. He took out his phone and scrolled past business contacts, attorneys, and people who could move money quickly. Then he stopped at one name. Lucille O'Neill answered, and Shaq did not waste time. He told his mother about the older woman with pneumonia, the 4-day late return, the manager, and the young employee who had nearly lost her job for trying to help. Then he told her about the bus stop and the notebook. "She has $623 saved," he said. "She's trying to finish nursing school, and if she loses that job, she may have to quit." Lucille listened without interrupting. Shaq expected her to tell him to pay the bill. Instead, she asked, "What do you want me to tell you?" Shaq looked through the windshield at Destiny. "I don't know how far I should go?" Lucille was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're asking the wrong question." Shaq leaned back in his seat. He knew that tone. It was the same tone she had used when he was younger and wanted an easy answer to something that did not have one. "Don't ask how much money you should give that girl," Lucille said. "Ask what she needs so one day she doesn't need somebody to rescue her." Shaq looked down at the phone. That was exactly the part he had not been able to put into words. Paying one tuition balance could help Destiny stay in school today, but it would not fix the next semester, the next family emergency, or the next job that disappeared without warning. Shaq told his mother he understood, but Lucille was not finished. "And Shaquille," she said, "don't turn that girl's hard day into a moment that makes you feel good about yourself." He said nothing. Of everything she had said, that was the sentence that stayed with him. It was easy to help someone when the help came with a thank you, a photo, or a story people wanted to repeat. It was harder to help in a way that left the other person with dignity and room to grow. Destiny had not asked Shaq to save her. She had only told him the truth because she was tired and scared. If he stepped in, the help had to belong to her future, not to his image. Lucille broke the silence first. "What does she want to become?" she asked. "A nurse," Shaq said. "Then find out if she's serious about it," Lucille replied. "If she is, help her meet people who can give her a real chance. After that, let her do the work." Shaq smiled a little. That sounded like his mother. No speech, no drama, just a clear next step. He thanked her and ended the call. For a few seconds, he stayed still, looking at Destiny through the glass as a bus passed on the far side of the parking lot. The driver finally asked, "We heading out?" Shaq looked at the road, then back at the bus stop. He had made up his mind. "Not yet," he said. "Turn us around." The SUV moved out of the parking space, circled past the front of the store, and headed back toward Destiny. She looked up when she saw the same vehicle coming toward her and seemed confused. Shaq reached inside his jacket and felt for a business card. This time, he knew exactly what he wanted to offer her. Not a rescue. A door. Destiny was still sitting at the bus stop when the black SUV came back around the parking lot. At first, she thought Shaq had forgotten something inside the store, but the vehicle slowed directly in front of her. The door opened, and Shaq stepped out with one hand inside his jacket pocket. Destiny quickly closed her notebook and stood, unsure what was happening. A few minutes earlier, he had told her he wanted to help her find a road instead of simply paying one bill. Now he held out a business card. There was no check attached to it, no cash folded behind it, and no promise that her problems were about to disappear. Just a name, a number, and an opportunity. Shaq explained that he knew people connected to community programs and healthcare organizations that worked with students trying to enter the medical field. He could make an introduction and make sure someone took Destiny seriously enough to sit down with her. After that, the rest would be hers. "I can open a door," he told her, "but you have to walk through it yourself." Destiny looked at the card, then back at him. The idea scared her more than she expected because money was simple. Either you had enough or you did not. An opportunity meant someone might look closely at her grades, her experience, and everything she still did not know. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked. Shaq answered without trying to make her feel better. "Then you'll find out what you need to work on." Destiny looked down again, and he let the answer sit for a moment before continuing. "But if you are good enough, I don't want being broke deciding how far you're allowed to go." That was the sentence she would remember later. Shaq was not promising her a job or telling her that wanting something badly was enough to deserve it. He was giving her a fair chance to prove herself. For someone who had spent years measuring every decision against bus fare, grocery money, medicine, and tuition, a fair chance felt almost as frightening as it did hopeful. Destiny slipped the card carefully between the pages of her notebook so she would not lose it. Shaq noticed how carefully she handled that little piece of paper and thought again about the $623 written inside. Before stepping away, he asked, "What's your grandmother's name?" Destiny seemed surprised by the question. "Esther," she said. Shaq repeated the name once, as if he wanted to remember it. Then he said, "Next time you think about quitting, ask yourself something. Did Esther help raise you so you could stop here, or so you could keep going?" Destiny lowered her eyes because that hit closer than anything he had said about money. Her bus pulled toward the curb before she could answer. Destiny picked up her backpack and turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Shaq. "What do I owe you if this works?" she asked. Shaq shook his head. "Make it work for somebody else someday." The bus doors opened and Shaq held one side while Destiny stepped aboard. She found a seat by the window and immediately opened the notebook again, checking to make sure the business card was still there. Shaq stood outside until the bus pulled away, then walked back toward the SUV. Destiny watched him disappear behind the traffic, not yet realizing that the card in her hands was about to take her somewhere the $623 never could. The video was never supposed to matter. A young employee near self-checkout had pulled out his phone when the argument at the service counter started drawing attention. He did not record the whole thing. He missed the older woman, the beginning of the argument, and most of what Destiny had said. What he captured was Shaq standing near the counter, the manager looking tense, and one sentence that cut through the noise. "A good policy shouldn't need to humiliate a person in order to prove that it matters." Later that night, the employee watched the clip several times in his bedroom. He almost deleted it. Instead, he posted it with a short caption explaining that Shaquille O'Neal had stepped in when a young worker was about to be fired for helping a sick customer. At first, almost nothing happened. A few hundred people watched it, then a few thousand. By the next morning, the number had jumped into the hundreds of thousands. People began reposting the clip without the original explanation, adding their own opinions and guesses. By that afternoon, millions had seen it. Some praised Shaq for standing up for an employee who had less power in the situation. Others said he had used his fame to pressure a manager who was simply doing his job. The comments became less about what had happened and more about what strangers wanted the story to mean. Then Destiny's name appeared. Someone found an old social media account. Another person posted where she worked. People who had never met her started calling her brave, dishonest, kind, reckless, inspiring, and attention-seeking, sometimes in the same comment section. A few claimed she had planned the whole thing because Shaq happened to be in the store. Others said she should sue. Some sent messages asking for money or interviews. Destiny sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone while her mother asked what was wrong. She finally turned the screen around and said, "I think everybody knows." Across town, Shaq saw the video for the first time when someone on his team sent him a link. He watched it once, then again with the sound off. The clip made the moment look simple. Famous man steps in, manager backs down, young woman gets defended. But Shaq knew it had not felt simple inside that store. Destiny had been scared. Her job had been uncertain. She had told him about nursing school, her family, and the $623 because she thought the moment was private. Now millions of strangers were pulling apart a story they only understood in pieces. His phone kept buzzing with messages. Reporters wanted a statement. People wanted him to explain what happened. Some praised him, some criticized him, and several wanted to know whether he had paid Destiny's tuition. Shaq ignored most of them. The only question he cared about was whether Destiny was okay. He called someone from his team and said, "Find out if she's being bothered. Don't make a big deal out of it. Just make sure she has somebody to call if this gets ugly." Then he sat back and looked at the frozen image on his phone. Himself standing beside the service counter, Destiny partly visible behind him. For the first time since that morning, Shaq felt uneasy about stepping in. He had wanted to keep one young woman from being crushed by a bad decision made in public. Instead, his presence had made the entire moment public in a way none of them could control. He knew fame could open doors, but he also knew it could drag people into rooms they never asked to enter. Destiny had gone from worrying about one manager to being judged by millions of strangers. Shaq stared at the screen for a long time before turning the phone face down. He had helped stop one kind of pressure. Now, he had to wonder whether he had created another. By the time Shaq returned to the studio, the Walmart clip had already become one of those stories that seemed to be everywhere at once. His phone was still filling with messages, and producers had seen the headlines before he even walked through the door. Shaq expected the usual questions. What really happened? Whether the manager had been fired, whether he had paid Destiny's tuition, whether he planned to make a public statement. He had no interest in turning the moment into another television story, but he knew people were going to ask. When he saw Ernie Johnson across the studio, Shaq almost prepared himself for another conversation about the video. Ernie walked over, looked at him for a second, and asked only one thing. "How's the young woman doing?" Shaq paused. The question was so simple that it caught him off guard. Ernie had not asked how many people had watched the clip. He had not asked what Walmart had said or whether Shaq was getting praised online. He had asked about Destiny. Shaq looked down for a moment and admitted, "I don't know yet." Ernie nodded, not judging him and not trying to make the answer heavier than it already was. "Then that's probably the part that matters most," he said. After that, someone called Ernie toward the desk, and the conversation was over. But the sentence followed Shaq through the rest of the day. During rehearsal, Shaq caught himself thinking about Destiny at the bus stop. He remembered the small notebook in her hands and the way she had carefully tucked the business card between its pages. Millions of people now knew the public version of what happened, but almost none of them knew about the $623, the nursing classes, or the fear in her voice when she said she might have to leave school. Shaq had told himself that giving her a real opportunity was better than simply solving one bill. That still felt right. But Ernie's question forced him to see something he had missed. Opening a door did not mean much if you never checked whether the person made it through. After the show, Shaq did not call Destiny directly. He did not want her to feel watched or pressured because a famous person had helped her once. Instead, he contacted someone on his team and asked for a quiet update. He wanted to know whether she was safe, whether the online attention had caused problems at work, and whether she had used the contact he gave her. "Don't promise her anything," Shaq said. "Just find out if she's okay." The answer came later that evening. Destiny was overwhelmed by the attention, but she was still working with the store while the review continued. More importantly, she had not called the number on the card yet. Shaq read that last part twice. His first reaction was disappointment. Then he stopped himself. Destiny had spent the last 2 days being judged by strangers, worrying about her job and trying to protect her family from the sudden attention. Maybe she was scared. Maybe the business card felt too important to use. Maybe she had convinced herself that calling would look like asking for another favor. Shaq knew what it was like to have one opportunity feel so big that failure suddenly seemed more frightening than never trying. He put the phone down and decided not to chase her. The door was open. Destiny had to choose when she was ready to walk through it. Before leaving the studio that night, Shaq saw Ernie again. He did not give him the whole story. He simply said, "She's okay. She hasn't made the call yet." Ernie smiled a little. "Give her time." Shaq nodded. He understood now that helping someone was not the same as controlling what happened next. Sometimes the hardest part was stepping back after you had stepped in. That night, miles away, Destiny sat at her kitchen table after everyone else had gone to bed. Her nursing books were open in front of her, but she had not read a page in almost 20 minutes. The business card lay beside her phone. She picked it up, read the number again, and placed it back down. Then she looked toward the dark hallway where her grandmother was sleeping. At 7:58 the next morning, Destiny reached for the phone. Charles Barkley did what he usually did when he saw Shaq carrying something heavy in his head. He made fun of him. Before the show, Charles joked about Shaq looking too serious, then made another comment about the Walmart video and how Shaq had somehow turned a quick shopping trip into national news. Shaq laughed, fired back with a joke of his own, and for a few minutes the pressure around the story disappeared. That was one reason he valued Charles. They could argue, tease each other, and act like nothing mattered, but Charles also knew when the jokes had done their job. After the cameras were off and most of the crew had started leaving, Charles found Shaq sitting alone near the set. This time, he did not make another joke. "You know the hardest part about helping somebody?" Charles asked. Shaq looked over at him. "What?" Charles leaned back and thought for a second before answering. "Knowing when to stop being the hero so they can become the hero of their own life." Shaq did not respond right away. The sentence was simple, but it landed exactly where his thoughts had been stuck for days. Since Walmart, people kept calling him the hero of the story. Every headline made it sound like he had stepped in, saved Destiny, and fixed everything. But Shaq knew better. He had stopped one bad moment. Destiny still had to live the rest of her life after everyone stopped watching. Charles could tell Shaq was thinking, so he kept going. "You can pay somebody's bill today," he said. "That might be the right thing sometimes. But if you keep solving every problem, sooner or later they start living inside your decisions instead of making their own." Shaq looked at the floor. That was what his mother had been trying to tell him in a different way. Help mattered, but dignity mattered too. If Destiny got through nursing school only because Shaq kept stepping in every time things became difficult, she might never fully believe she had earned the life waiting for her. Worse, the world might never let her believe it either. Shaq told Charles about the business card, though he kept Destiny's private financial details to himself. He explained that he had introduced her to people who could give her a real chance in healthcare, but he had not promised her a job or guaranteed success. Charles nodded. "That's probably the right move." Then he added, "Open the door. Don't carry her through it." Shaq smiled. "You've been talking to my mother?" Charles laughed. "No, but your mother sounds smart." The joke lasted only a moment. Then Shaq became serious again. "What if she fails?" he asked. Charles shrugged. "Then she fails at something she chose to try. That's still better than never finding out what she could do." Shaq looked at him. Charles was not saying to abandon Destiny. He was saying that real support sometimes meant standing close enough to help without standing so close that the other person could not move on their own. Shaq had spent most of his life solving problems with size, money, connections, or force of personality. This problem required something harder from him: restraint. That night, Shaq made a decision. He would not call ahead and tell anyone to hire Destiny. He would not promise to cover every tuition bill. He would not make her future depend on continued access to him. He would make sure the people evaluating her took her seriously, and then he would step back. If she earned the opportunity, it would belong to her. If she fell short, she would know exactly what she needed to improve. Before they left the studio, Charles slapped Shaq lightly on the arm. "Man, you already did something important," he said. "Now give the girl a chance to do something important too." Shaq nodded and watched Charles walk away. He pulled out his phone, saw several messages about the viral video, and ignored all of them. Instead, he opened the contact from the healthcare program Destiny had been referred to. He typed one short message. "Give her a fair look." Nothing more. Then he hit send. The next step would be Destiny's. Destiny almost turned around before she reached the front desk. The building was smaller than she expected, a community healthcare center with a crowded waiting room, old chairs, and a receptionist answering two phones at once. Nothing about it looked glamorous, but that made the opportunity feel more real. She had worn her best blouse, brought copies of her school records, and taken an earlier bus because she was terrified of being late. Shaq was not there. No one from his team was there either. For the first time since the Walmart incident, Destiny understood exactly what he meant when he said he could open a door but could not walk through it for her. The woman interviewing her introduced herself, looked over Destiny's application, and got straight to the point. "I was told Shaquille O'Neal thought you deserved a chance to interview," she said. "That gets you into this room. It doesn't get you the position." Destiny nodded. Strangely, hearing that made her feel better. She did not want anyone giving her a job because of a viral video or because a famous person knew her name. She wanted to know whether she could actually do the work. The interviewer asked about her classes, her customer service experience, and how she handled pressure. Destiny answered carefully, trying not to talk too fast. Then came the question that changed the conversation. Why nursing? Destiny had prepared several answers the night before. She could have talked about steady work, helping her family, or needing a career with a future. Instead, she thought about Esther. Years earlier, her grandmother had been frightened in a hospital room after a stroke, confused about where she was and afraid to sleep. One nurse had pulled a chair beside the bed and stayed there longer than she probably had time for. She did not give a speech. She simply held Esther's hand until her breathing slowed. Destiny had never forgotten it. "My grandmother was scared," Destiny said. "That nurse couldn't fix everything that night, but she made her feel safe. I remember watching that and thinking I wanted to be able to do that for somebody someday." She paused, then added, "I want to become the kind of person who can make a frightened patient feel less afraid because I chose to sit down and stay." The interviewer stopped writing for a moment. She looked at Destiny differently after that, not warmly enough to suggest the decision had already been made, but closely enough that Destiny knew the answer mattered. The interview lasted nearly an hour. By the end, Destiny had learned something important. Wanting to help people was not enough. Her grades were good, but she needed stronger clinical experience. Her communication skills were solid, but she still had gaps in medical documentation and patient intake procedures. The program was willing to move her forward, but only into an evaluation period. She would have to complete additional training, maintain her school performance, and prove she could handle the work without special treatment. If she passed, there could be a part-time role that fit around her classes. If she did not, the opportunity would end there. Destiny listened to every requirement and wrote them down. There was no applause, no dramatic offer, and no one telling her that everything would be okay. That made the moment more valuable to her. This was not charity. It was a real chance with real conditions. Before she left, the interviewer handed back one copy of her resume and said, "You have a lot to learn." Destiny waited. "But you also have something we can't teach very easily. You notice people." Destiny thought immediately about the sick woman at Walmart. Outside, she sat on a bench near the bus stop and opened the same spiral notebook where the number $623 was still written several pages back. On a clean page, she wrote 4 things: evaluation, training, grades, probation. Then she underlined them. For the first time in days, the next step did not feel like something happening to her. It felt like something she could actually work toward. She took out Shaq's business card, looked at it, then put it back without calling him. She wanted the next news he heard about her to be something she had earned. Several weeks passed before Shaq heard anything about Destiny. He did not call the program for updates, and he did not ask anyone to make things easier for her. That had been the hardest part of the plan. Once he opened the door, he had promised himself he would step back and let her decide what happened next. Every now and then, he wondered how she was doing, especially when another clip from the Walmart incident showed up online. The story had already started to fade from the news, which was exactly what Shaq wanted. Destiny did not need millions of people watching her anymore. She needed time to work. One afternoon between meetings, Shaq checked his phone and saw a message from the person overseeing the healthcare program. There was no long explanation, no report about her grades, no request for money or another favor, just 7 words. She earned it. We didn't give it. Shaq read the message once, then again. A smile slowly spread across his face. Of all the updates he could have received, that was the one he had hoped for most. The message meant Destiny had passed the evaluation period. She had completed the extra training, improved where she needed to improve, and kept up with her nursing classes while doing it. The program had offered her a part-time position that would give her real patient care experience and hours that could work around school. Nobody had lowered the standards because Shaq had made the introduction. Nobody had handed her a position because the internet knew her name. She had been given a chance to stand at the starting line, and then she had done the running herself. Shaq leaned back in his chair and thought about the first time he saw her behind the Walmart counter. Her hands had been pressed flat against the surface because she did not want anyone to see them shaking. At the bus stop later, she had shown him a notebook with $623 written inside. Back then, almost every part of her future seemed to depend on something she could not control. One manager, one paycheck, one tuition deadline, one unexpected bill. Now, for the first time, there was something in her life that belonged completely to her. She had earned it. His first instinct was to call her and congratulate her. He even opened her contact, then stopped. This moment did not need him at the center of it. Destiny deserved to tell her mother, her grandmother, or whoever she wanted before hearing from the man who had introduced her to the program. So Shaq closed the contact and sent one short reply to the supervisor instead. Good. That's how it should be. Later that evening, Destiny sat at her kitchen table with the offer letter in front of her. Her mother had read it twice because the first time she moved too fast and missed half the words. Esther sat nearby, holding the paper carefully at the edges as if it were more valuable than it looked. The job was not going to make the family rich. Destiny would still need to watch every dollar, catch buses, study late, and worry about bills. But it paid more than her old position, gave her experience in the field she wanted, and moved her one step closer to becoming a nurse. Her mother finally looked up and asked, "Did Shaq get you this job?" Destiny thought about the interview, the training, the mistakes she had corrected, and the nights she had studied after coming home exhausted. Then she shook her head. "He got me in the room," she said. "I got the job." Esther smiled. That was the answer Destiny had been waiting to give herself. Across the country, Shaq had already put his phone away and moved on with his day. He believed the hardest part was over. He was wrong. A few months later, long after the Walmart video had stopped trending, his phone would light up in the middle of the night. And this time, Destiny would be the one calling. The message reached Shaq a little after 2 in the morning. He was still awake when his phone lit up, and for a second he almost ignored it. Then he saw Destiny's name. She had never texted him this late before. The message was short. "Maybe I thought I was stronger than I really am." Shaq sat up and read it again. There was no explanation, but he knew enough about her to understand that she would not send something like that unless she had reached a point she could no longer carry alone. He called her immediately. Destiny answered on the third ring. At first, all Shaq could hear was her breathing. Then she said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have texted you." Shaq did not let her change the subject. "What happened?" That was when the words started coming. Esther had been taken back to the hospital after another health scare. Destiny's mother had been spending long hours between work and the hospital, barely sleeping. Destiny was still working, still attending classes, still trying to keep her grades up, and still helping with bills at home. The new job had helped, but it had not made life easy. Every day seemed to need more from her than she had left to give. She had missed an assignment deadline that week and received a warning from one of her instructors. The night before, she had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with a textbook open under her arm. That afternoon, she had gone straight from class to the hospital, then from the hospital to work. Now she was sitting alone in her car outside the apartment because she did not want her mother to see her crying. "I can't keep doing everything," she said. "Every time I'm at school, I feel guilty that I'm not with Grandma. When I'm at the hospital, I'm thinking about work. When I'm working, I'm thinking about the class I'm falling behind in." Her voice broke. "Maybe I should just leave school for a while." Shaq stayed quiet long enough to let her finish. He could have told her she was strong. He could have reminded her how far she had already come. He could have said that winners do not quit, the kind of line people like to put on posters. But none of that was what she needed at 2 in the morning. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Do you want to stop becoming a nurse, or do you just want this exhaustion to stop?" Destiny did not answer right away. Shaq could hear her trying to breathe without crying. Finally, she whispered, "I just want to sleep without feeling like I'm failing somebody." That answer told him everything. Destiny did not hate nursing. She did not regret the path she had chosen. She was simply tired enough to confuse pain with direction. Shaq leaned back and looked at the dark room around him. Then don't make a lifetime decision on a night when your body is only asking you to rest, he said. Destiny cried harder after that, but this time she did not apologize for it. Shaq waited until her breathing slowed. He told her to go inside, drink some water, set an alarm, and sleep for a few hours. No school decisions tonight, no quitting messages, no trying to solve her grandmother's health, her mother's exhaustion, and the next semester all before sunrise. Tomorrow, you can look at the real choices, he told her. Maybe you need fewer work hours. Maybe you need help from school. Maybe you need a few days to breathe, but you don't decide your whole future tonight. Destiny was quiet again, then said, "What if tomorrow I still want to quit?" Shaq answered, "Then tomorrow you can think about it with a rested mind. Tonight, sleep." Before hanging up, Destiny said something that stayed with him. "I thought getting that job meant things were finally going to get easier." Shaq understood. People loved stories where one good moment fixed everything that came before it. Real life was rarely like that. One opportunity could change direction without removing every hill in the road. "Sometimes better doesn't feel easier right away," he said. "Sometimes it just means the struggle is finally taking you somewhere." Destiny did not respond, but he heard her car door open. Shaq stayed on the phone while she walked inside. He heard keys, a door closing, then her mother's sleepy voice asking if everything was okay. Destiny said yes, and this time the words sounded a little more honest. Before hanging up, she told Shaq, "I'm going to sleep." He answered, "Good. That's the only job you have tonight." The call ended. Shaq placed the phone on the table and sat there for another minute. He had helped Destiny once by stepping into a public fight. Tonight had been different. There was no manager to confront and no call to make things right. All he could do was keep her from making a permanent choice during a temporary breaking point. The next morning, Destiny did not quit. Instead, she asked for help. And that decision would soon bring her face to face with the woman whose advice had quietly shaped everything Shaq had done from the beginning. Destiny had imagined meeting Lucille O'Neill more than once, but never like this. There was no stage, no crowd waiting for a speech, and no camera pointed at them. It happened at a small community event where Shaq had invited several families, students, and volunteers to spend the afternoon together. Destiny had come straight from class, still tired from the week she had spent trying to catch up after Esther's hospital stay. She was doing better now. She had reduced a few work hours, spoken honestly with her instructors, and accepted help instead of pretending she could carry everything alone. Still, when Shaq walked over and said, "There's somebody I want you to meet," Destiny felt more nervous than she had during her healthcare interview. Lucille was sitting at a table talking with two women when Shaq brought Destiny over. She stood, smiled, and reached for Destiny's hand before Shaq could give a long introduction. "So, this is Destiny," she said. Destiny froze for half a second. The way Lucille said her name told her immediately that Shaq had talked about her before. Not the viral video version of her, not the girl from Walmart that strangers argued about online, but the person behind it. Destiny looked at Shaq, then back at Lucille. "I've wanted to meet you," she said. Lucille smiled. "I've heard enough about you that I figured we would eventually." Shaq was called away a few minutes later, leaving the two women alone at the table. At first, Destiny talked about safe things: school, work, Esther getting stronger, and how difficult it had been to admit she needed help. Lucille listened without rushing her. There was something familiar in that kind of attention. It reminded Destiny of the nurses she respected most, the ones who made a person feel like the next 5 minutes belonged completely to them. Finally, Destiny looked across the room at Shaq and said the sentence she had wanted to say since she arrived. "Your son changed my life." Lucille shook her head. "No." Destiny blinked. Sure, she had heard wrong. Lucille looked toward Shaq for a moment, then back at her. "He stood in the right place on the right day," she said. "That matters. But he didn't get up for your classes. He didn't take the bus to work. He didn't study when your grandmother was sick. He didn't walk into that interview scared and do it anyway." Lucille reached across the table and placed her hand over Destiny's. "You were the one who had to wake up every morning after that day." Destiny looked down at their hands. For months, she had thought of her life in two parts, before Shaq walked toward the service counter and after. It was easy to believe everything good that followed began with him. In one sense, it had. But Lucille was forcing her to see the other half of the story. Shaq had opened a door, but there had been hundreds of mornings after that when Destiny could have stopped walking. There had been exams, hospital visits, late buses, short paychecks, and the night she nearly quit. No one had carried her through those moments. "I'm still grateful to him," Destiny said quietly. "You should be," Lucille replied. "Gratitude is a good thing. Just don't build your whole life around owing somebody." Destiny looked up. Lucille leaned a little closer. "One day, you're going to be standing where Shaquille was standing. Maybe not in a Walmart, maybe in a hospital room, maybe with somebody who is scared, broke, embarrassed, or about to give up. You'll have something they need in that moment. Maybe it'll be knowledge, maybe time, maybe just the courage to speak up." She paused. "That's when you pay it back." Destiny felt her throat tighten. Lucille's next words came without drama, but they stayed with her more than any speech could have. "Don't spend your whole life thanking someone for opening a door. Become the person who holds that door open for the next person." Across the room, Shaq glanced toward them. Destiny looked at him and finally understood why he had never tried to control what happened after Walmart. He had called when she was breaking down, connected her to an opportunity, and stepped in when she needed someone. But each time, he had eventually stepped back. Maybe that was part of the help, too. He had never asked Destiny to become a story about his kindness. He had expected her to become something of her own. Before they left, Lucille hugged her and asked for one promise. "When you become a nurse, remember how it felt when you were the person who needed somebody to stop." Destiny nodded. "I will." Lucille smiled. "Good. Then none of this gets wasted." That night, Destiny returned home and found Esther asleep in her chair with the television still on. She covered her grandmother with a blanket, then sat beside her for a few minutes instead of going straight to bed. Lucille's words kept running through her mind. Destiny had spent months asking what Shaq's help would mean for her future. For the first time, she began wondering what her future might mean for somebody else. The clinic was already behind schedule when Destiny met the woman who would make her think about Walmart all over again. The waiting room was full, 2 nurses had called out sick, and every exam room seemed to have someone waiting inside. Destiny was still in training, but by then she knew enough to move quickly without making patients feel rushed. Her next patient was a young mother named Carla, who had come in because of a pain in her side that had been getting worse for weeks. She answered the first few questions normally, then became quiet when Destiny asked about insurance. Carla looked down at the floor and asked, "How much is this going to cost?" Before Destiny could answer, the woman picked up her purse. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come." Destiny asked her to wait. Carla shook her head and explained that her insurance would not cover much of the visit. She had 2 children at home, rent due soon, and barely enough money left for groceries until payday. "If they start running tests, I can't pay for that," she said. Destiny looked toward the hallway. Another patient was already waiting, and the clinic schedule gave her very little time to solve a financial problem that was not technically part of her job. For one second, the simplest choice was obvious. Explain the policy, document that the patient refused care, and move on. Then Destiny remembered an older woman carrying a broken vacuum cleaner. 4 days late, hospital papers in her hand. Back then, Destiny had believed kindness meant breaking a rule when the rule seemed unfair. She knew more now. She had learned that good systems often had options hidden inside them, but somebody had to care enough to look. Instead of telling Carla everything would be fine, Destiny asked her to sit down for 5 more minutes. She called the clinic's financial assistance coordinator, checked whether Carla qualified for a reduced-cost program, and asked a supervisor what could be done before any tests were ordered. It took longer than Destiny wanted. Twice, someone reminded her that another patient was waiting. She apologized, kept moving, and refused to treat Carla's fear like an inconvenience. The answer was not perfect, but it was enough. The clinic could reduce the visit cost, delay part of the payment, and connect Carla with a local assistance program if additional testing was needed. Destiny returned to the room with the paperwork and explained it slowly. Carla read the first page, then looked up as if she did not fully trust what she was hearing. "So I don't have to leave?" she asked. Destiny shook her head. "No, we can keep going." Carla sat back down and held the papers with both hands. A few minutes later, while Destiny was taking her blood pressure, Carla asked, "Why are you spending so much time helping me?" Destiny stopped for a second. She could have given a professional answer about patient care or clinic policy. Instead, she thought about Shaq standing in a Walmart aisle, about Lucille's hand over hers, and about the business card she had once carried like it might disappear. "Because someone once spent time on me," she said. Carla did not ask for the whole story. She only nodded and let Destiny continue the exam. That made the moment feel even more important. There was no viral video, no famous person nearby, and no crowd watching to see what Destiny would do. Just one tired mother who was afraid she could not afford to be sick, and one nursing student who had enough knowledge now to help her stay. Destiny understood something she had not understood the morning at Walmart. Kindness did not always mean fighting the rules. Sometimes it meant learning the rules well enough to find the part that could help someone. Before Carla left, she stopped at the doorway and thanked Destiny. Destiny watched her walk toward the front desk, then checked the clock and hurried to her next patient. She was still behind schedule. There was still paperwork waiting. Nothing about the day had suddenly become easy. But later that evening, Destiny sent Shaq a short message. "I think I finally understand what you meant about opening doors." Shaq read it twice. Then he smiled, because he knew she was no longer talking about the door he had opened for her. Graduation day arrived faster than Destiny expected. For months, she had imagined the moment as something huge. But that morning, it felt strangely ordinary. Her mother was in the kitchen fixing her hair. Esther sat near the window in a dress she had saved for special occasions, moving more slowly than she used to, but refusing every offer of help. Destiny stood in the hallway holding her cap in one hand and looking at the people who had carried her through the years when quitting would have been easier. She had wanted this day for so long that now, with it finally here, she was almost afraid to touch it. At the ceremony, the room filled with families taking pictures, calling names, and saving seats. Destiny's mother stayed close to Esther, making sure she did not get tired. Destiny kept looking toward the back rows without meaning to. Every time the doors opened, part of her expected to see a very tall figure step inside and make half the room turn around. Shaq had never promised he would come, but she had still hoped. He had been there at the worst moment of her working life. Some small part of her wanted him to see the best one too. The ceremony began, and Shaq was not there. For a few minutes, Destiny felt more disappointed than she wanted to admit. Then she looked at her mother, who was already crying before the first group of students crossed the stage. She looked at Esther, sitting straight in her chair even though her hands were shaking slightly. That was when Destiny understood something she should have understood earlier. Shaq did not need to be in every important moment. He had already done what he was supposed to do. He had stopped when she needed someone to stop. After that, the life she built had to belong to her and the people who had been beside her long before anyone knew her name. When the nursing graduates began walking across the stage, Esther gripped the arms of her chair. Destiny's mother leaned over. "Mama, stay sitting. She can see you." Esther shook her head. When Destiny's name was announced, Esther pushed herself up. Her knees trembled, and Destiny's mother reached out to steady her. "No," Esther said quietly. "Today, I stand." She stood. Then she lifted a homemade sign above her chest with both hands. "Our destiny made it." The letters were uneven. One corner of the poster had bent during the drive. Destiny could see exactly where Esther's hand had slipped while writing. It was not perfect, and that was why it broke her. Destiny saw the sign before she reached the center of the stage. She stopped for half a second and covered her mouth. The instructor beside her gently touched her arm, reminding her to keep moving. Destiny accepted her diploma, but by then, tears were running down her face. She looked at Esther again. Her grandmother was still standing, even though Destiny could see the effort it took. Her mother had one hand around Esther's waist and the other pressed to her own face. Destiny had spent years trying not to let either of them see how scared she was. Now none of them were trying to hide anything. After the ceremony, Destiny found them in the crowd and wrapped both arms around Esther first. Esther laughed into her shoulder and said, "I told you I was standing." Destiny could barely answer. Her mother joined the hug, and for several seconds the three of them stood in the middle of hundreds of people moving around them. No one cared that they were blocking the aisle. Destiny held them tighter because she knew exactly how many mornings had led to this one. Later, when the crowd had thinned, Destiny returned to the row where her family had been sitting to pick up Esther's bag. That was when she noticed an envelope resting on the empty chair beside them. Her name was written across the front. She opened it carefully. Inside was a plain card with one sentence. "I saw you stand strong on the first day. Today, let your family watch you fly." At the bottom was one name, Shaq. Destiny read it twice. Then she looked toward the back of the room, even though she already knew he was not there. Somehow, that made the message mean more. He had remembered. He had wanted her to know he remembered. But he had also understood that this moment belonged to Esther, her mother, and Destiny herself. Esther looked at the card and smiled. "He got it right," she said. Destiny folded the note and slipped it behind the old business card she still carried in her notebook. She had started that notebook years earlier to track money she did not have enough of. Now it held proof of things money could not measure: a chance, a promise, a graduation, and the people who had helped her keep going. As Destiny left the building with her family, she thought the story had finally reached its ending. She was wrong. Months later, Shaq would walk into a community clinic for an event and see a nurse coming toward him. At first, he would not recognize her. Months after graduation, Shaq agreed to visit a community clinic during a local outreach event. It was the kind of stop he had made many times before. Meet families, thank the staff, spend time with kids, take a few pictures, then move on to the next part of the day. He knew almost nothing about the clinic beyond the schedule his team had sent him. What he did not know was that someone there had been waiting years to see him again. Not because she needed help this time, but because she finally had an answer to a question he had asked her at a bus stop. Shaq had just finished talking with a group of children when a nurse walked toward him from the hallway. She wore navy scrubs, carried a tablet under one arm, and had her hair pulled back. For a second, Shaq looked at her without recognition. Then she smiled. Something about that smile brought back a Walmart service counter, a small spiral notebook, and a young woman trying not to cry. "Destiny?" he said. She gave a small laugh. "Still me." Shaq looked down at her badge. Destiny Chavis, RN. He read it once, then again. For several seconds, Shaq said nothing. Destiny had seen him fill entire rooms with energy, jokes, and confidence. She had watched him stop a manager with nothing but a calm voice. But now he just stood there looking at the letters after her name. "You did it," he finally said. Destiny nodded. "Yeah, I did." Shaq smiled and pulled her into a quick hug, but when he stepped back, she could see something had changed in his face. This was no longer the frightened nursing student from Walmart standing in front of him. She had become the person she once hoped someone would give her the chance to be. They walked through the clinic together while Destiny explained what she was doing there. She worked with patients who often had trouble getting regular care because of money, transportation, or insurance problems. Some arrived scared because they had waited too long. Others came in already expecting to be told no. Destiny had learned how to explain forms, find assistance programs, and slow down when someone needed more time. Shaq listened as she talked about the work, then stopped near one of the exam rooms. "You remember what I asked you at that bus stop?" Destiny said. Shaq thought for a second and nodded. He remembered. "If I paid everything you owed, what would happen after that?" Destiny looked around the clinic. A receptionist was helping an older man fill out paperwork. A child was coloring at a small table in the waiting room. A nurse pushed a cart past them toward another room. Destiny smiled and said, "This is the answer." Shaq looked around again, but this time the clinic felt different. Years earlier, he had worried that giving Destiny money would only solve one moment. He had wanted her to find something that could keep moving after he was gone. Now, he was standing inside it. The opportunity had turned into training. The training had turned into work. The work had turned into people Destiny could now help without asking Shaq for anything. Then Destiny told him about a patient she had seen earlier that morning. A young mother had almost walked out because she was afraid she could not afford the visit. The clinic was busy, and it would have been easy to let her leave. Instead, Destiny had found the financial assistance coordinator, checked the available programs, and helped the woman stay long enough to get the care she needed. Shaq listened without interrupting. When Destiny finished, he asked, "What did you tell her?" Destiny hesitated, then smiled. "I told her somebody once stopped for me." Shaq looked down. The words were simple, but they carried the whole story back to him at once. A broken vacuum cleaner, 4 missed days, a young woman with $623 in a notebook, his mother telling him not to turn someone else's pain into a moment about himself, Charles telling him to stop being the hero, Lucille telling Destiny to hold the door open for the next person. None of those moments had disappeared. They had traveled forward. Shaq turned his head for a few seconds and rubbed one hand across his face. Destiny noticed but did not say anything. She understood enough by then to let silence do its work. When Shaq looked back, his eyes were wet. He laughed softly at himself. "You weren't supposed to make me cry today." Destiny smiled. "You started it." That made him laugh for real. Before Shaq left, Destiny walked him toward the entrance. There were people waiting outside, and his team was already preparing to move him to the next stop. At the door, Shaq looked back at the clinic one more time. "You know what the best part is?" he asked. Destiny shook her head. "You don't need me anymore." Destiny thought about that for a second. "No," she said, "but I'm glad you stopped." Shaq nodded. Then he walked outside. Destiny stood at the door for a moment before turning back toward the hallway. A patient was waiting for her. Another family had questions. There was more work to do. And as Shaq climbed into the car, he finally understood that the most important thing he had done that morning at Walmart was not saving Destiny. It was giving kindness enough time to become someone else's strength. On the drive away from the clinic, Shaq found himself thinking about the beginning. Not the graduation, not the viral video, not the phone calls in the middle of the night. He thought about a Walmart electronics aisle and a phone charger in his hand. That morning, he could have paid for what he needed, walked outside, gotten into his car, and gone on with his day. Nobody would have blamed him. He had a schedule, people waiting for him, and no responsibility for what was happening at that service counter. Destiny was a stranger. Her job, her tuition, her family, and the $623 in her notebook had nothing to do with him. All he had done at first was hear a voice that made another person feel small. Then he had made one choice. He turned around. Shaq had spent most of his life being measured. People measured his height before they knew anything else about him. They counted his points, championships, contracts, businesses, and everything his name could sell. Those numbers mattered in the life he had built, but sitting in the back of the SUV, he understood that none of them explained what he had just seen inside that clinic. Destiny was a nurse now. She had helped a mother stay long enough to receive medical care, and when the woman asked why, Destiny had answered that somebody once stopped for her. Shaq had not planned that moment. He had not trained Destiny, taken her exams, worked her shifts, or stayed awake beside Esther in the hospital. But one decision he made in a store years earlier had become part of a decision Destiny made for someone else. There was no statistic for that. He took out his phone and called his mother. Lucille answered, and Shaq told her about the clinic. He told her about the badge that read Destiny Chavis, RN, and about the young mother Destiny had helped that morning. Lucille listened the same way she had when he first called her from the Walmart parking lot. When he finished, she asked, "You happy?" Shaq looked back through the rear window, though the clinic was already out of sight. "Yeah," he said. Lucille waited a moment before asking, "Then what did you learn?" Shaq smiled because he knew she had been waiting years to ask him that question. "Sometimes you don't have to change the whole world," he said. He thought about Destiny standing behind the counter with her hands pressed flat to hide how badly they were shaking. Sometimes you just have to stop walking when somebody in front of you needs you to stop. Lucille did not answer right away. Then she said quietly, "Now you understand." Shaq laughed a little. "You could have just told me that from the beginning." Lucille laughed too. "I did. You just needed a few years to hear me." After the call ended, Shaq put the phone away and watched the city move past the window. Back at the clinic, Destiny had already returned to work. There was no reason for her to stand at the entrance watching his car disappear. Another patient was waiting, an older man who looked nervous and kept checking the paperwork in his hands. Destiny called his name, brought him into an exam room, and noticed immediately that he was confused about several questions on the form. She could have explained them while standing near the door and moved on. Instead, she pulled a chair closer and sat down at his eye level. The man apologized for taking so long. Destiny shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "We have time. Start from the beginning." He relaxed a little and began explaining. Shaq never saw that moment. There was no phone recording it, no crowd gathering in a hallway, and no one waiting to post it online. He did not need to see it. Years earlier, his mother had warned him not to turn Destiny's pain into a story about himself, and now he finally understood why. The best part of helping someone was not having them remember your name forever. It was reaching the day when they no longer needed you there at all. Destiny had taken what someone once gave her, time, dignity, and a chance, and made it available to another stranger. And that was enough. Epilogue. 4 days. In the end, the whole story began with 4 days. A broken vacuum cleaner was returned 4 days too late. An elderly woman had spent those days sick and unable to come back sooner. A young employee decided that her illness mattered more than a date printed on a receipt. A manager saw a broken rule. Destiny saw a person who needed help. And several aisles away, Shaquille O'Neal heard a conversation that he could easily have ignored. He did not know Destiny had only $623 saved. He did not know she wanted to become a nurse. He did not know about Esther, the tuition bill, the late night studying, or the night Destiny would one day call him ready to give up. He certainly did not know that years later he would walk into a clinic and see RN printed beside her name. None of that was visible when he put down the charger and started walking toward the service counter. That is what made the choice matter. One sick woman received compassion. One young employee almost lost her job for giving it. One stranger decided not to walk away. One student received a chance. That student became a nurse. And one day, another frightened patient found someone willing to sit down and stay. The chain could have ended at any point. Destiny could have given up. Shock could have solved everything with money and never looked deeper. Lucille could have told her son what he wanted to hear instead of what he needed to hear. The healthcare program could have lowered its standards. Destiny could have looked at a crowded clinic and decided she was too busy to help one more person. Instead, each person made one choice that gave the next person room to make another. Shaq did not save Destiny's entire life. No one person could have done that. He simply helped her hold on long enough to keep building it herself. Years later, the most important part of that morning was no longer the famous man standing in a Walmart aisle. It was what happened after he left. Destiny kept going. Then she became the person who stopped for someone else. Some people stay in our lives for years. Others may only cross our path for a few minutes, but sometimes a few minutes are enough to remind someone that they still matter. And if that person carries the reminder forward, kindness does not end when the moment is over. It keeps moving.